I have been tremendously pleased to be the owner of an SSL product. We're 6 or 7, with all that and that and whatever. Oh wait, there's those too. Phenomenal products that do what it is I need them to do, which is why I can get you all here and stand behind it and say, this stuff is awesome. And it's been my pleasure then to get to know these guys and to invite them, and a pleasure to have them agree to send Jim here all the way across the Atlantic Ocean to come and talk to us this evening. And Jim has a very interesting talk, which I'm looking forward to hearing.
This presentation might be a little more abstract than you're expecting. I hope it's good. I hope you take away some ideas from it. I hope it's interesting more than anything else, because if it's not, there's more of you than there are of us, and we have to get out of here with the equipment. So hopefully it'll be good. This presentation is called "Why Do You Work That Way?" and it's a question I often ask people. But before we start kind of an alternate take on workflow and what it means, I thought I'd probably point out why we should be talking to you about it. You know, it seems a pretty straightforward thing, but what qualifications do SSL have to talk to you about the way that you work? Well, this picture is of the SL4000B, which was the first console that we launched as a solid-state logic product. The first mixing desk to put a computer in it that worked properly to do automation. It was the first desk that acted as a remote control for tape machines. So this kind of introduced the concept of a mix window and a tape window and an automation system, just like we all have inside our laptops now. Jumping forward to 1983, at the height of technology, you can see an 8-bit colour on the screen. Those of you with a fondness for Atari, I could give you this picture if you like it. But this is Total Recall. So you can take a mix that you do in New York with a master tape and a big 8-inch floppy disk, go to London and bring back exactly the same mix again. And we did this first. So just like when you open a Pro Tools session and it comes back exactly how it used to be, we were the first people to do this on a desk. This is a product that probably very few, if none of you, have ever seen, and it was the SO1. And this was the first ever digital desk that we made. It was actually an 8-track digital mixer and audio recorder that was designed for CD mastering and editing. You've got faders, you've got jog wheels, transport controls, dedicated EQ and dynamic buttons. And it looks not unlike the large format control surfaces that other manufacturers would suggest you purchase today, which we were doing in 1989. And this is the AWS, first launched in 2004, still going strong now as the AWS 948 and 924. And this was the first analog desk that was also a control surface for your DAW. And at a touch of a button, it flipped from being an analog desk to the faders for Pro Tools right in front of you. And we were the first people to do this. So we like to think that because of the people we talk to, because we come out and do nights like this and listen to people, because we've got this very fortunate position of working with real engineers and producers for so long, we've been able to listen to them, work out what they need and help make products that change and define their workflow. But probably the coolest thing about my job is I get to fly around the world and talk to people about how they make music and how they mix music and why they do things a certain way. And every time I visit someone, I ask them a question. And I ask the same question to everyone, because it's interesting. And I ask, why do you work that way? When you're a working engineer or a working producer, people hire you because of your sound. And people expect you to get that sound and to get it quickly, which means you don't have time to experiment. You don't have time to do different things. Because if you do, you not only cost money, but you risk your result. So there's a real reluctance to go out and try doing things a different way. So you get stuck in this same rut that I've always worked this way. And sometimes asking yourself this question is worth doing. Now, I get to see all sorts of studios. I get to see studios like this, a little laptop, controller keyboard, a mouse and a keyboard right in front of it, centre of their workflow. I also get to go and see studios like this, The guy on the left is called Simon Gray. He's Australian, but don't hold that against him. He's actually quite a cool dude. He's an amazing jazz funk keyboardist, and he works with Incognito. He's currently musical director for Real People. He's a thoroughly nice dude. And in his setup, you can see that he's got 2 big screens and his mouse and his keyboard in front of him, so the computer's the centre of his world. But he's got a little controller to his left, he's got a small desk in front of him, he's got a bit of outboard to the right. But then you look at a similar setup on the right-hand side of the screen, and this is the studio of David McEwen and Eric Apapule, who mixed the Plan B album, The Defamation of Strickland Banks. Now, if you haven't heard it, buy it, it's brilliant. And you look at their setup, you can see 2 big screens, they've got the mouse, the keyboard in front of them, so the computer's the centre of their world, but they've got a small desk, a little bit of outboard either side. Roughly the same kind of setup as what Simon's got, but you can see little cues that suggest they work in a completely different manner to him. And you start getting some crazy studios moving into the hybrid world. This is this mad bloke from Sydney who has all of this outboard and a small desk, and he wanted all of his outboard accessible on every channel of his desk whenever he wanted it. So he bought a bunch of our recordable patch bays. But I think the coolest thing about this picture is if you actually look at the table it's sitting it's his old mixing. Now we've got round to checking it out. But this is another extreme example of someone else working differently. You can imagine me walking in here and saying, well, why do you work that way? You then start moving up the scale a little bit, you know, a room a little more like this one, for example. On the left, this guy is Luke Smith. He works with Ben Hillier in London, and he's also done a lot of mixing for Mute Records artists, so he's worked with Depeche Mode, Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds, Goldfrapp. And you can see he's got a big monitor, he's got a mouse and a keyboard right in front of him, the computer is the centre of his world. But on one side of his desk he's got loads of modular analog tool stuff, and on the other side of his desk he's got a bunch of outboard. And he works that way. On the right hand side of the screen, this is E Studios in Helsinki, Finland, who took out a big old 60 channel mixing desk to put in this smaller one. And you can see there's a big screen with a mouse and a keyboard in front of it and a little bit of outboard either side. Roughly the same kind of setup, but works very, very differently. And then you start getting into crazy home studio territory. You're like this. This is Tom Rowlands from Chemical Brothers, and that's his duality that he's sitting in front of, with an additional producer desk in the middle of it, so he can have his mouse and his keyboard and his machine. And then this, if anyone's an analog synth geek, you have to go to this place. It's just off his kitchen. So he's got his VCS3 Putney, he's got an enormous System 100, yeah. He's got a Technosaurus at the back. That's one of the originally new modulars. What you can't see on this wall is his 3 303s, his 2 808s, his 909 and his Buckler string machine. But you go and ask him, why do you work that way? There are all these different workflows. So I make a point of asking, why do you work that way? And workflow is something that's so important to us, and it defines how much we get done, and the way we get it done, and how much we enjoy getting it done. So I want to talk a bit about workflow, but what I don't want to do is to talk to you about little nitty-gritty things. Instead, I'm going to talk about 3 things that a lot of you probably don't often think about, which are 3 factors that affect the way that we work. And these are physical factors, these are emotive factors, and these are cognitive factors. Let's start with physical. Now this, of course, the more erudite amongst you will know, is Vitruvian Man. Da Vinci's drawing to indicate the proportion of the human body. Our height is the same as our arm span. What you may not know is that Da Vinci actually invented the windmill a long way before Pete Townsend did, and this is one of his lesser known sketches. But the point is about the way our bodies are structured. Now this is a diagram that sets out how things should be put in front of us, and it designs things into 2 zones, what we call the repetitive reach and the occasional reach. So this is things you should touch, need to touch all the time, and things you need to touch some of the time. And the repetitive reach zone should be between 13 and 18 inches from your elbow. The idea of it being, if you imagine that you've got a belt strapped around your elbows and you're just moving your hands like this, because for our bodies this is really, really simple. So stuff you need to touch a lot needs to be close to you. The occasional reach, stuff you need to touch some of the time, is kind of about 2–2.5 feet away. And it's defined as the difference between when you have to move your shoulders forwards to reach something. Now we've all done sessions where you spend 4 hours leaning over to the top of the desk and your back's killing you. Move the stuff that's over there close to you so your back doesn't hurt. It seems like a simple thing to think. And everything should be in a span roughly about 1 metre either from your head, centred on the balls of your shoulders. Let's put it in the context of a real studio. Now let's go back to Dave and Eric's studio in London and let's look at how they're set up and some of the cues as to why they work that way. So you can see they've got 2 big screens and the keyboard. They've got a webcam in the middle here, so they obviously do quite a lot of remote work. What else is interesting? Let's overlay the repetitive zone and the occasional zone on top of it. So you can see in the repetitive reach zone, they have their trackball, their keyboard, and their transport controller. Now you look at the studio and they've got the big PMCs and they've got the NS10s and they've got the little Dropbox speakers for reference. But their monitor controller is outside of the repetitive reach, so they only occasionally switch their speakers around. You'll also notice that as well as a webcam, so they obviously work internet and the internet a lot, they've got a drive caddy that you can slot drives in and out of, which obviously shows they have a high turnover of projects. And in what I would consider to be a crying shame, if you look at the mixing desk, you can see that they've only got 2 faders pushed up, which highlights how much in the box rules their world, and the small collection of outboard is a little bit of candy on the top of it. Now, this concept of occasional reach and repetitive reach also goes into product design. And so with this product, which you can have a little play with outside, if you want to use it with a keyboard, you're going to have all your shortcuts on the keyboard. So you don't need to reach the buttons to do all the keyboard shortcuts. So what you need in your repetitive reach is the faders, the hand pots, and the transport controls. However, if you want to use it without the keyboard and be more creative with it, you need those buttons in there. So all the keyboard shortcuts are within your repetitive reach. So you're not moving the shoulders and starting to do your back in. And we think about this stuff when we design products and the ergonomics of it. But it spins one level deeper when you start thinking about the way our hands work, not just about the proportions of our body. And there are 4 basic ways which our hands have evolved to move in. There's a power grip, which is putting things between the palm of our hand and our fingers. There's a precision grip, which is between the thumb and fingers. There's a hook grip, and there's a scissor grip. And these are the ways that our hands move. If you actually think about it, those are the 4 modes of operation. Now, you compare that to a thoroughly modern phenomena of the touch screen. Now we all have these devices. They're great little computers. They're terrible phones. But you know, we have this wonderful thing of wonderment of interacting with them. And you think about how many of those modes that our hands have actually evolved to work in are actually used when you have a touch screen. I mean, the closest you get is zoom in and zoom out, which is a precision grip. But the way that this works is actually in a way that's alien to the way that our hands have actually evolved to function. And there's a really nice principle, I read a great blog about it, it's called Objects Under Glass. If you Google it, it's really worth a read. A bloke who used to work for Apple wrote it, he's having a real brand, so it's really worth having. I'm going to give you an example of a control surface that does respond to the way that our hands naturally move. And this is actually the most successful control surface that any musician has ever touched, and it's been around for over 700 years. It's the piano keyboard. Now you look at the fingers in that picture and the way that they are, and the precision grip, and the power grip, and the flatness and the scissoring, and then you compare that to flannel gloves or a touchscreen and the way that hands have to move to make that work. So the ergonomics of how we feel and the way we work isn't just about how our studio is set up, but also about how our bodies are set up to work inside it. The next thing we're going to talk about is the emotive setup, the way a space makes you feel, which has a massive amount of impact on the way that we work. I'm going to highlight this with a bloke called Mike Skinner, who some of you may know. He was the frontman for a band called The Streets, and he was a bit of a computer freak and did loads of really interesting videos. And he did one that really struck me about how a space could make you not want to work. So I'm just going to play this video because it's quite good. because I think it makes a great point. So he read once where some travel writing legend said that the secret to travelling is that whatever displeasing situation you encounter, you can always make yourself more comfortable. Find a nicer angle in your seat. Put your head near a breezy window, maybe even pull on another pair of socks. And it works. If you take care of your immediate sensation, then the mental frame of things can turn quite remarkably. Now, Mike had quite a few large royalty checks, and over the course of a year, he amassed a prodigious amount of vintage Valvery in his studio. Big boxes of joyous, harmonically distorting glassware. Things that slur the transient information of sound and heat the music right up. And also heat his room up. Hundreds of owls in a small soundproof room started to have side effects similar to the main function of a sauna. Now, he always used to have his comfort down as secondary to the engineering of sound, but things got silly, like trying to make beats in the engine room of a merchant navy ship. So he called in the salespeople and stumped for a dose of refrigeration. And his point is that how a stable temperature of 23 degrees Celsius, so 76 Fahrenheit, has affected his music, his life and his art. So he urges us all to make ourselves comfortable. Now, it's a really interesting point that this guy, who's kind of got the holy grail of studios, I can put as much kit as I want in it, and it's going to be brilliant, actually put him in a space that he didn't want to be creative. And it's kind of a double-edged sword. And there's some interesting stuff from the world of corporate offices. Now, there's a thing called sick building syndrome, which some of you may have heard of. And if you work in an office that's packed full of little cubicles like this, with bad air conditioning and no natural light, there is a higher incidence of staff illness, there is lower productivity, and there is a higher turnover of staff within the organisation. People don't want to work there. The biggest study about this was actually done by Microsoft, who built new offices in Holland in 2007, which were all based on natural light and hot desking and different zones and open communication. And they actually found that it increased productivity by 25% by making it a place where people wanted to work. Now, you transpose that into what we do, where time is money. You could take Fridays off. You could work Fridays and make 25% more money by being in a space that makes you feel like you want to work there. And it's such a massive difference when you put it into those numbers, 25% more efficiency, just for being somewhere where you feel like you want to work. Another thing I was going to talk about, cognitive things, the way the brain works, the way that we sense things. And here we go for Anatomy 101, I'm Dr. Motley. The brain has two hemispheres, and the left side of the brain controls analytic thought, so logic, maths, straight line stuff. The right side of the brain controls creativity, intuition, art, music, wiggly line stuff. And the two hemispheres operate independently and never the twain shall meet. Now, this has quite an impact in places like a recording studio, which is where science meets art and the two worlds collide. So I'm going to start you off on this with an equation. So we shifted from anatomy to math 101. And here we go. Mouse plus monitor equals juggling. Now, when you move a mouse, you're moving your hand down here and you're looking at a monitor up here. So what you're doing is hand-eye coordination, which is analytic thought and a left brain function. Every time you pick this up in your studio, you're stopping your brain from efficiently doing creative stuff, which is the right side of the brain. You're putting a barrier on. It feeds into the concept of playing a mix. Everyone programs things within an nth degree of their lives. And you have one hand that can move one of these things at once. Whereas in fact you actually have 10 fingers that can move 10 of these things or 3 or 4 of these things at once. And it used to be the case back in the day before wonderful shiny silver dongles that we used to sell in software that have immense amount of power in them. We'd do 4, 5, 6 different mix passes and throw aux sends and push faders around. And then we'd splice them together or choose the nicest one. And you get happy accidents. Things that you didn't expect to sound good that suddenly you realise sound great. And all the best engineers and producers will tell you that this is an instrument, this is part of the performance of the song. And so by using this singular left brain device, you're missing out an extra element of creativity that you could have in your music making. Now this is my boss, his name's Peter. This is his studio. So this is the main room of Real World. What you don't see is there's a very short stage at the back of the room. It's only like a foot tall. And there's no separate live room. And when Peter's in there recording, he wants all the musicians in the same space, and so the producers and engineers can pick up the vibe from the musicians and kind of transmit it through and stuff. And this leads into one of his principles of how he makes music, which he calls Alpha and Zen. Now when he starts a project, he'll start in Zen, which is ideas mode. They'll get everyone together and they'll jam, and they'll just spin off each other, and they'll just keep coming out, idea, 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 leave the tape rolling, and they keep going until they've got no ideas left. Then they stop and they switch into alpha mode, which is much more analytic. So they'll play the tape back, they'll listen to the ideas, they'll think, should the song be in this key? Is this the right arrangement? Is it the right tempo? Is that the right sound? And all these very analytical decisions. The kind of point of this is the fact that it identifies when they're trying to make creative processes and when they're trying to do technical analytical processes and not put barriers between them. You know, a really good example of this is if you just cut a vocal with an artist and your initial temptation is to just pull up a plugin and start EQing it and seeing how it sounds. But what you probably should do is just try and track the BVs. You just finish the lead vocal, the singer's in the right headspace, you're in a recording headspace, and get people to have those little ideas, then go back and engineer it. No, so many people today say that they're mixing while they're tracking, or they're producing while they're engineering. And going back, you used to have things called tracking sessions, where you thought about where the mic goes and capturing the right sound and playing the right thing. Then you put it away, and you go to a thing called a mixing session, where you were very analytical about what you'd just done in the creative process. And by pulling up that plugin before you try and take the BVs, you've just destroyed A, your creative impulse at the time, and B, the artist's creative impulse at the time. So I tried to pull a few things together as little sort of take-home tips and tricks to think about in your own studios. Might sound like a no-brainer. Make a note of the things you touch most and move them closest. Some pieces of software, particularly Pro Tools, require you to have multiple modifier keys in your shortcuts, you know, Control Shift Option T Z F1, and you have these little RSI crabs. Why don't you just reassign it to F1? Because your brain has to think about putting your fingers in the right position to do the shortcut, which is a left brain activity. Whereas if you just look at F1 and go bong, you can keep that creative like that. Seems so simple, but so few of us do it. Identify when you want to be creative, and identify when you want to be technical. And try and keep those processes in their own space so your brain naturally has space to do each bit one at a time rather than trying to muddle the two together. You get a much greater focus. You get more ideas and it's more fun doing it. Let's say you're doing a drum beat. That's better. opening up a drum grid with your mouse and going, or just having a generic control and go, which one's going to give you a happy accent with a really cool groove? Which one's quicker? Which one's simpler? Which one doesn't involve the left side of the brain? For those of you that don't know, read the flipping manual. Well, you can say the proper version.
You're not allowed to swear in presentations.
Well, sometimes. You might be doing something in your software that takes you 40 minutes, but there's actually a function that does it for you. And you've not read the manual and you don't know about it. Now this might look a little bit sucky, but all your equipment isn't cheap. And why on earth would you think of buying it from somewhere that didn't let you take it home and try it out? I'll do it, do the right thing. But find out if it fits in your workplace. Why are you buying from someone who hasn't asked you, what do you work at? What other kit have you got? How are you planning on using it? If someone doesn't understand what you're trying to do, how can they possibly serve you best? Hopefully, that's going to give you a different take on the workplace. And hopefully there's a little bit of something in there for all of you that you can take home and try a little bit differently. And I know time flies. I know you get hired because of your sound, and you don't want to do things to change it because that's what gets you hired. But if you can make a couple of little changes to make it feel happier in your room, or allow you to be more creative at things, give you the space to have more ideas without distracting yourself, it doesn't have to change the sound, it doesn't have to change why people get it, it can only actually emphasise